right, this next email comes from Josh. He says, I have a question about the future of the console wars.
Oh.
Xbox and PlayStation have been head-to-head for a while now. Doesn't seem to be letting up anytime soon. My question is, what would happen if one of the consoles actually won and put the other company out of business completely? What if Sony became a monopoly of the main consoles? I personally think that the games could work better because they will be made specifically for the PS4, but pricing and marketing could change dramatically. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, I mean, I've been advocating for a one console future forever, for a decade. I want it to be a standard like Blu-ray is or like VHS was before it, like DVD was. I want there to be a standard, and then different manufacturers can manufacture a box. Now, of course, then you run into
like a Steam box.
The 3DO.
Well, because then you run into problems where everyone has a standardized box, but then the Xbox box has some special doohickey on it that they have some Kinect add-on, and then it all just splinters
off
like
again. It should be like a Blu-ray player.
I think it should be like a Blu-ray player.
But you could theoretically run into the same problem if you had the same specs, but everyone's... So if the specs are all the same, then what's different from box to box? Is it connections? Is it like menu systems?
Right.
I guess like something has to be different in order for a manufacturer to put in the investment of making their own thing to carve out their niche of the market, right? So it's like then the problem becomes the Samsung box versus the Toshiba box.
Right.
This one has these capabilities, that one has those capabilities. Now, if I'm a developer, which capabilities do I keep in mind?
Right, but they all play movies equally, right?
I would say counterpoint to this, though. And I think you make a valid point there. But counterpoint, I think the competition's good for us. I think the console war culture is terrible for us. But I think the competition can be good. For example, when Microsoft comes out and a couple of years ago and says, here's our always-on entertainment-friendly box.
Yeah, if they were the only ones making the video game console, then it's like, well...
But you can still have that competition even if all games ran on all platforms. That's a function separate from the games being run on, you put the disc in.
Yeah, but you're still, at that point, we're talking about we're talking about the kinds of... We're still talking about different consoles at that point. We're talking about different focus.
Video games are the only medium that you can put a CD in any CD player.
Like Blu-ray players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a variety of Blu-ray players available in the market, but every Blu-ray will work in every player, right?
Right, but at the end of the day, that's because the only mode by which you can interact with a Blu-ray is to look at it. And something that
that's a good point.
And something that needs to be played from a software standpoint, from a design standpoint, has to be designed very specifically around the capabilities of whatever machine it's being played on. So it's like it's got to be one of two things. Either there are no competitors, there's one standard, and that's just what it is, which I think is a bad look for consumers. Or you can if you did it's a standard in terms of the specs, but the implementation is different, then inevitably, it becomes a question for a developer. Like, well, the Toshiba box has 4 inputs for controllers, and the other ones have 2. So I want to make a 4-player game, so I can only sell my game on the Toshiba box. That becomes really getting into the weeds there, and becomes, I think you fragment your audience at that point, and it makes it a headache for software developers, I think. At that point.
I concur that you have a really good point there. There might be more in common between video game consoles and cars than there are video game consoles and Blu-ray players. I mean, this is an interactive device, and that's a very different kind of experience.
That's true. Think back to a time when there was, for all intents and purposes, a monopoly in the video game industry, 1985 to 1989, and I would just like to point out that nobody looks back on that as a dark period.
That's because we were all too young to know how dark it was.
But it wasn't a dark period. Software thrived.
Well, software thrived, but the moment third parties had a chance to get out of that deal,
that's true.
They ran for the hills. I mean, the second they had somewhere else to go.
Yeah, because they could make more money.
Sure.
That's the impetus of every company on Earth.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, would I say it's a dark time in terms of there were bad games? No, there were great games.
Yeah.
But I think that I would argue that once that smoke clears and we get into the 16-bit era where everyone isn't chained with by titanium to Nintendo, I think we get a better era of games.
See, but I think here's the deal. Everyone says, competition is good, so thereby multiple consoles are good. But what's good is competition amongst the software makers, and that raises the bar. I don't care about hardware competition. It's a pain in the ass that I have to buy 2 $400 or $500 boxes to play all the video games I want to buy, or 3 if I'm interested in Nintendo, which I am.
But it's not
I don't like that. I'd rather have that $800 back and spend it on 16 more great games by having one box that plays all the games. And I have to have a PC. I don't like that fragmentation at all. I don't think it's good for consumers. Like, yeah, competition's good, but you need to really think about what competition you want. Like,
Well,
does there need to be competing boxes?
I think we're at this point almost arguing semantics here. My problem, the boxes are almost identical at this point anyway.
you gotta buy them both.
It's the operating system that's the problem. That when I think of the console first, and when I talked about the example earlier, Microsoft versus Sony D3 2 years ago, that was really an operating system focus level issue. So I think that's as much a part of the console as anything now. And I do think that while the hardware standards could easily be made more adaptable, I do worry that that if you don't have some distinctiveness in the way that you interface with the unit itself, you're not going to.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of counterpoints. Like, I think Nintendo's marriage of hardware and software is really special, and that's part of what makes the company so special. So to remove that and just say, look, you make games for someone else's standard now, you'd still have incredible game experiences from Nintendo, but I definitely think there's something lost there. Like, there's plenty of counter arguments to be made, but I mean, you're right that the PS4 and Xbox One are very similar boxes, and it's a pain, and I don't like that I am a Halo fan and I'm an Uncharted fan, and that's like a $400 tax on me as a gamer.
It's true. Speaking of console wars, I want to recommend the book Console Wars.
That's great.
Currently reading it right now. Super fascinating look at how Sega clawed its way up to fight, neck and neck with Nintendo in the late '80s and early '90s. It's,
And then got its neck slit.
well,
In the end.
eventually. But like I was a Nintendo kid growing up, and just reading about how Sega really like put a plan in place to take on Nintendo, and then achieved their goals is super fascinating.
The
It's
fact
great.
that they
gives me a lot of respect for them.
that Kalinske, that freedom,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
unprecedented.
And then
book
a
is called-
concept. What's up? I'm sorry.
No, the book is called Console Wars. You should check it out.
And I was gonna say, and then a concept video of the first Gran Turismo destroyed them.
Well,
That's always what I look back on. That moment, that E3, where like Sega was there with working Dreamcasts and amazing looking
You mean
games.
Saturn?
Yeah.
Saturn?
What's that?
Working Saturn or
No,
working
Dreamcast.
Oh, which one are you talking about?
I'm talking when they were there with the Dreamcast.
Yeah.
And then the PS2 wasn't a thing that existed yet.
Oh, I'm
but
sorry.
Sony was like, here's this concept video of what Gran Turismo will look like on PS2.
Yeah.
And it never looked anywhere close to that. But on that alone, people were like, whoa. Everyone stopped and went, whoa, I don't want to get the mediocre system now. I want to get the super system later.
Well,
And it was just a year of slow death. for
To
Dreamcast.
be fair, they had poisoned their well years before.
Sure,
that.
sure, sure.
I mean, that's why I thought you were going back. But this is another topic for another time.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan.